1 year ago, I did this video called Who's Better, where I took the lineups of both the USMNT and El Tri, and I put them side by side, and I compared them and gave them ratings, and this was a very controversial video. Now I'm taking that video and I'm updating it. I'm looking at it again. I'm seeing what I said back then, and if I need to update anything based on where we are at today. What up, guys? I'm Pete Douthit, host of the 11 Yanks Show. Most of you know me already. We cover everything in the American soccer landscape, 2 to 3 videos a week, so smash that subscribe button if you're new here. If you're not new, hit that like button. Helps other people to find us, so let's dig into this.
Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to 11 Yanks Breakdown, where we discuss all things USMNT. I'm Pete Douthit, and today we are doing a player-by-player analysis of the starting lineups of the USMNT versus El Tri. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to go position by position, and we're going to compare and contrast the US starting player versus the El Tri starting player. Now, this starting lineup isn't necessarily the lineup that I would go for the USMNT, but it's the lineup that I think is most likely if we had a game tomorrow. And that's what's crucial here. You don't get points for potential, and you don't get points for regression. So
I think this was December of last year, so about just over 11 months ago.
Example, a 20-year-old American player will be judged on how good he is today, not how good he could be in 2 years. Or a 34-year-old Mexican player will be judged on where he is today, not on the fact that he's declining and might not even be relevant a year or two from now. And yes, I'm a USMNT guy, but I'm going to try to be objective and look honestly at these players, and I've watched a lot of every single player we're going to talk about and look at them from a critical lens and say just how good are they. Now we're going to give each of them a score from 1 to 10, and here is the ratings key for us to look at so you know what we're dealing with. 10, top 10 in the world in their position. 9, top 25 in the world in their position. 8, very, very good. 7, competent. 6, kind of inconsistent. And 5, lacks actual quality. So that'll help you evaluate what we're looking at when we're talking about player ratings. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add all of them up at the end and see how both teams come out. Now, whoever wins this point system doesn't mean that they automatically have a better team. There's a lot of things that go into it. Tactics, coaches, systems, cohesion, all of that plays into it, but it is an interesting look at where the US is at versus where Mexico is at this point right now if we had a competitive game tomorrow.
So before we get into it, I will say that this video is very controversial. I think it's still my most watched video. It has over 3,000 comments on it, and most of them are El Tri fans who are just coming after me. Some of them had some interesting stuff to say, but most of them were just very angry that I think basically in the overall of this video, and you'll see, I suggested that the U.S. was only marginally behind Mexico and that it was going to change over time. And for some people were not happy that I said that, and they wanted me to basically say that the U.S. was trash and that Mexico is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So it was very controversial, but let's dig into it. I'm going to update these ratings based on where we're at today.
All right, and starting at the very top, we have Guillermo Ochoa versus Zack Steffen. So 10 years age difference between these two guys. Ochoa in his prime was probably a 9, as in one of the top 25 goalkeepers in the world. Zack Steffen is still on the rise. Where are they today? I'm going to give Ochoa a 7 out of 10. The last couple of years, he's been on a clear decline in Europe, and then he moved back to Liga MX, and last season we saw him be a little bit inconsistent, but he has since stabilized, and in the last few Mexico games, he was very good. I'm giving Guillermo Ochoa a 7 out of 10. I'm also giving Zack Steffen a 7 out of 10 because I think he's a competent goalkeeper, but I don't think that he's been lighting it up either for the US or for Manchester City. He's still growing. He's still young for a keeper. He has a lot to learn. I'm giving him a 7 for now. Next.
Okay, so to update this, I'm going to give Guillermo Ochoa a 6 out of 10 instead of a 7. I mean, he's aging, right? He's in his late 30s now. I think he's 36. I could be wrong, but yeah, 36 years old. He's not the same guy he used to be. He's very inconsistent now. We saw that in the last couple of games that he played for Mexico. Look, this happens. Like, he was a great goalkeeper in his day. He's not anymore. And, 2 years now in Liga MX, and you can see the level has dropped. You can see he's just not as focused. He's not as consistent with his shot stopping. He's not as commanding. 6 out of 10. Zack also gets a 6 because Zack has been inconsistent. If you look at his performances the last year, whether that's for Manchester City or for the US, there's been some good ones, and there's also been some not great ones, or at least even within games, he's had good moments and then not great ones. I mean, whether that's the semifinal of the Nations League against Honduras, where he came out, and completely missed a cross into the box that, Sargent had to rescue him from, or small things playing for Manchester City where you're like, he's got to do better than that. And even for the US, even recently, I like Zack Steffen, and I think he still offers us a lot with his feet, but I can't get too I don't want to say get too excited, but we have to be honest. He's had some really good moments followed by really poor ones even recently. So both of these goalkeepers get a 6 out of 10.
Next up, we have right backs, and there's Luis Chaka Rodriguez versus Sergino Dest. Now, I'm going to be honest. I think that Chaka Rodriguez is probably one of the weakest links on the Mexico national team. They don't have a lot of really strong right backs, so he's kind of been the default right back. He's liable for a couple of defensive errors for both club and country. He's not as good technically in tight spaces when you put real pressure on him. And if I'm setting up a high press with the US, I'm targeting Chaka Rodriguez as a guy that's probably the weakest link in possession. And defensively, if you got Pulisic running at him, I think that's not a good matchup at all. Sergino Dest is now at Barcelona, far from perfect, but has been very, very good, playing for one of the top clubs in the world. Chaka Rodriguez gets a 6 because he is inconsistent. He's never been a lockdown defender. He's been sometimes good enough, sometimes not. 6 out of 10 for Chaka Rodriguez. Sergino Dest gets a 9 out of 10 because I think he is a top 25 right back in the world. And the cool thing is he's only going to get better at just 20 years old. Left back.
Okay, so Chaka Rodriguez gets for me, he gets a 6 again. He's still very inconsistent. And I'm not going to lie, I'm tempted to give him a 5. And I just think he's gotten worse over the last year, not better. Now, he's only 30 years old. So, it's hard for me to say, he's aging out the way Guillermo Ochoa is. But he just technically continues to be poor in the attack. He can't defend 1v1. I mean, we saw it so many times in the Nations League. We saw it in World Cup qualifying. We saw it in the most recent game where he literally lets an injured Pulisic just run into the box and he stops running. And then Cata Dominguez has to defend him. But I will give him a 6. I can't do any more than that right now. And Sergino Dest gets a 9 because for better or for worse, I think he's a top 25 right back in the world. And I thought about this. I said, is he really? I mean, maybe last year I probably jumped the gun on him being a top, center back in the world or right back in the world. This year, I don't think so. I think he's tightened up defensively, at least somewhat. He's added more end product to his game. And let's face it, he's playing for Barcelona. Now, you should say, it doesn't matter where you play. It's how you play. That is true. And I do think he's at the tail end of 25. Like, I don't think he's in the top 15. But I think you'd be very hard-pressed to find me 25 right backs in the world that are genuinely better than him on both sides of the ball, It's very modern right back, quick, pacey, technical, can create on his own, very dangerous. And he has done a lot better with his defending more recently. You could maybe argue him for an 8, and I probably should have given him an 8 last time round, But, I mean, I really think the guy deserves a 9 this time round. So I'm going to give it to him.
Left backs. Jesus Gallardo versus Antonee Robinson. Gallardo is one of those attacking fullbacks. He gets up and down the field. He's been very consistent both for Monterrey and for Mexico. And at 26, he is in his prime. He's probably got 2 World Cups left in him, and it's going to be difficult for any young Mexican fullbacks to unseat him. Antonee Robinson has been performing well for Fulham, but has been up and down, both for club and country. There's an inconsistency to Antonee Robinson, and that doesn't mean he's not the left back for the US. He's got issues with his 1v1 defending. He's got issues with his combination play in tight spaces. Jesus Gallardo gets an 8 out of 10 because he's very, very good. Not quite a 9. I don't think he's a top 25 left back in the world. Antonee Robinson is inconsistent. 6 out of 10. You don't know what game you're always going to get for him. And yes, he's starting to perform better for Fulham right now. But based on his national team performances and his club performances, he's still a 6 out of 10 for me.
Okay, so I'm going to have to drop Jesus Gallardo down. He's probably declined the most in the last year of any Mexican player. and that brings him down absolutely to 6 out of 10. Antonee still gets a 6 because he's still inconsistent. I mean, the thing about Antonee is that, before his good performances, they're better now. So his good performances are better than they were, and his bad performances are not as bad as they were before. Like, a lot of times his bad performances was his 1v1 defending, just getting smoked by players. And he doesn't do that anymore. He's tightened up that a lot, but he's still inconsistent. And I was tempted to give him a 7, but when I look back, I can't give him more than a 6 if he's inconsistent. Now, Jesus Gallardo on both sides of the ball, not a threat going forward. Enough. He'll get in good positions, right? And a very attacking left back, but he is not, and he cannot be, at least in my opinion, a 7. He's not even competent. This last year, he's just been absolutely terrible across multiple competitions for Mexico. And so I can't give him that.
Left center backs, and this is a really interesting fight. Hector Moreno versus John Anthony Brooks. Both of these guys have been solid center backs for their teams. Hector Moreno started 4 out of the last 5 friendlies for Mexico, so it's clear that Tata really trusts him. I know there's a section of the fan base that feels like Cesar Montes should be partnered with Nestor Araujo at center back, but clearly Tata trusts Hector Moreno despite his age and despite where he's playing. He's still a very good center back for them. John Anthony Brooks is the #1 center back for the US guys, and right now it's not even close. 7 out of 10 for Hector Moreno. Even though he's no longer playing at a very high level, he has been a consistent performer for Mexico, and if there was a game tomorrow, I think he would be not only the starter, he would be a lockdown defender for them. John Anthony Brooks gets an 8 out of 10. He's not a top 25 center back in the world. I do think that once he gets turned, he isn't always great at catching up with his guy, and he does have moments where he lacks concentration, but 8 is still a very, very good center back rating for John Anthony Brooks.
So, oh boy, I'm going to have to change Hector Moreno just because he's not the starter anymore. It seems like Tata's starters now are Nestor Araujo and Cesar Montes. So Brooks is going to go up against Cesar Montes for the sake of this exercise. And Cesar Montes has been, very solid for both Mexico and for Monterrey. And so I am going to give him a 7. Brooks gets a 7 as well. Brooks was an 8, but he's dropped a notch. Now, I'm not going to give him a 6 because I don't think his inconsistency for both the U.S. and for the national team has been, long enough to get a 6. It's been a temporary drop in form that he seems to be recovering from. And so I will drop him down to 7 along with Cesar Montes. Now, Montes, I think, has the potential to be an excellent center back, but he needs to leave Liga MX. Otherwise, he is going to stagnate. Okay, he's 24 years old. Now is the time to go. And I would say the same thing about Miles Robinson. They both need to leave North America and they need to go to Europe and push themselves and challenge themselves. Otherwise, they will only ever have a certain ceiling. So Montes, definitely a competent, strong defender. Probably been, at least in the last few games before he was injured, one of the better ones for Mexico. I can't give him more than a 7 because I don't think he's an excellent defender. I want to see him test himself a little more in Europe before I give him an 8. But I will give him a 7 for now, and Brooks gets dropped to a 7.
Araujo versus Aaron Long. There was rumors about Long getting a move to Europe a year back. Personally, I don't think he's a guy that could do well in a top 5 league. Both of these guys are solid center backs. Nestor Araujo's had a very good career in Europe. He's kind of had a rough year this year with Celta Vigo, but in my opinion, he's still a consistent, reliable defender. Nestor Araujo, 7 out of 10. I toyed with the idea of giving him an 8, but I can't really say he's very good. Also, there are some times where he's played with Mexico and he hasn't always looked comfortable. Aaron Long has had a rough season with the New York Red Bulls and has made some mistakes with the U.S. men's national team. He gets a 6 out of 10 simply because he is inconsistent. Aaron Long is honestly just a placeholder for the next couple of months. If we had a competitive game tomorrow, he would start, but Chris Richards is the guy that's going to take over his spot very, very soon.
So Nestor Araujo is one of those guys that's declined, in this last, year or so. And again, he's only 30, so it's not like he's ancient, but his form has dipped and dipped consistently enough for Celta Vigo and for the national team that even Mexico fans are really unhappy with him. He gets a 6. Inconsistent, man. You can't be that inconsistent. Miles Robinson gets an 8. Now, some people might say, why would you give Cesar Montes a 7 and Miles Robinson an 8? Because Miles Robinson is a way better defender 1v1. The thing about Miles Robinson, guys, is that he's the answer to the question, what if our best athletes played soccer, right? He's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the athleticism. I mean, his 1v1 defending alone, the ability to defend in isolation is incredible, and so I still think he has a ceiling. He needs to improve his distribution. He needs to improve his reading of the game a little bit. But I am going to give him an 8 over Cesar Montes because I do think he is better than him, even though they're about the same age and kind of at the same place in their careers. Like I said, though, they both need to go to Europe. And it's interesting now that you see the scores of the total so far. And it's indicative of where Mexico's been, where most of their problems over the last year have come from their center backs. A lot of their problems have come from their fullbacks, them not being able to defend. It's an aging defense, and Cesar Montes is kind of the exception to that. Hector Moreno has been good in moments, but he's not really a starter anymore for them, which is why I don't have him here as the starter. Let's continue, though.
And this is where it gets really fun. Edson Alvarez, the 23-year-old midfielder / defender for Ajax. I think Edson Alvarez will mostly be used in midfield because that's where Tata Martino is going to want to use him. Tyler Adams, 21-year-old, playing for RB Leipzig. Julian Nagelsmann trusts him a lot, either always starting or getting significant minutes off the bench. Edson Alvarez, for me, gets an 8 out of 10. And I know a lot of people are slagging on him right now because he's lost his starting spot with Ajax, but he's very good as a holding midfielder, protecting the back line. His distribution is excellent, setting up attacks. He reads games very well. Tyler Adams has also been really excellent, both for the US and for RB Leipzig. Had a Champions League goal in the semifinals a couple months back, and really strong with his work for RB Leipzig this year. That's an 8 out of 10. I think if Tyler Adams continues to progress, he could easily be a top 25 holding midfielder in the world.
Okay, so I'm going to give both of them the same, 8 for Tyler and 8 for Edson. They're probably very close. Edson might, they've both had rough moments in the last year. Like Edson hasn't been perfect. Tyler hasn't been perfect either. But in terms of consistency, they've both probably been their respective countries' most consistent performers. And it's interesting that they play that crucial position at the 6. Mexico fans will tell you Edson's better. USA fans will tell you Tyler's better. I think they're very, very similar players. I think that Edson might be a little bit better with the ball at his feet, but Tyler is better at just playing the 6, just defending, closing down space, reading the game. He's also the captain for, the U.S. at this point, which he absolutely should be. I'll give them both an 8. And it'd be interesting to see where they both go in their careers and where they end up. They're relatively similar ages right now, at least. Okay. 22 and 24, not too similar, but, close enough. And I think for both of these guys, that's the big question, is which one of them is going to make that jump into a top 25 or even top 10, midfielder in the world in that position as a 6. I think both of them are going to have to improve on the ball for sure. Tyler especially, but even Edson. He's very sloppy with his giveaways sometimes, very sloppy. And you don't always see it in Holland because they play teams that don't punish them for it. But Tyler, this last weekend, right, against Hoffenheim, gave the ball away, it becomes a goal. If he keeps that form up for a long period of time, then yeah, his rating will drop. But right now, he's been consistent and steady and strong enough over the course of the last year that he absolutely gets an 8 out of 8. All right, let's continue. And this is where it gets interesting because Guardado is not a starter for them anymore.
The box midfielders and Andres Guardado versus Weston McKennie. Guardado is 35, but still featuring regularly for Real Betis, has a lot of experience, is a very intelligent midfielder, doesn't cover as much ground as he used to. In my opinion, has been Mexico's best midfielder for the last 10 years. Age is slowing him down, but right now, Andres Guardado is still a top midfielder for me. Weston McKennie, at 22 years old, playing for Juventus, is on the rise. A lot of people doubted him when he went there and said he wouldn't adapt to playing at that level. But every time you raise the bar for Weston McKennie, he absolutely rises to the occasion. Andres Guardado gets a 7 out of 10 because he's steady and consistent. He isn't going to dominate the midfield as much as he used to, and that probably bumps him down a notch from being an 8. he's still a guy that Mexico wants starting in their midfield as that box-to-box guy. Weston McKennie, 8 out of 10. Definitely not a top 25 box-to-box midfielder in the world, but still very, very good. There's a reason Pirlo trusts him in the big games. A lot of people see McKennie as a bulldog in midfield. I think he's got more than that. His ability to arrive late in the box, to score goals, to spring attacks, to turn a defender and dribble into space is way underrated. Total currently stands at 50-52, and here is where it starts to get fun.
Okay, so before we go any further, we have to change this because Gallardo is no longer a starter for Mexico. If you look at the last, especially if we're talking about World Cup qualifying, he's just not. And he's aging, right? I mean, the poor guy is 36 years old or 35 or 36 now. But I can't. If he's not a starter, then we have to put Luis Romo there. So Luis Romo, I'm not even convinced he's a starter because the truth is with Mexico, we don't know who the third midfielder is right now. We know Edson and Herrera will always start. But Tata hasn't been clear. Sometimes it's Charlie Rodriguez. Sometimes it's Luis Romo. Sometimes it's Sebastian Cordova. He's even tried playing Orbelin sort of inside. It is sometimes Andres Guardado. So we're just going to go with the player that has the most minutes in World Cup qualifying in that position, and it's Luis Romo, who's more of a defensive midfielder. But we are going to put him here and compare him. And I think Luis Romo is a good player, very competent. I don't think he's anywhere near Weston McKennie's level right now. And so he gets a 7. Weston McKennie gets an 8. McKennie hasn't made that jump yet to, top 25, in the world in his position, but he's been very good. And at the beginning of the season for Juventus, he struggled a little bit. New coach, Allegri, came in. He had some, discipline issues, but you could see now him winning Allegri all over again, right? And that is important because, that's what it means to play at the highest level. You have to constantly earn your spot. You have to constantly prove yourself over and over and over again. When your level drops, out you go, somebody else comes in. So when your level drops, you have to recognize what's happening. You get benched, you get told off by your coach, and you got to come back, and you've got to come back stronger, and you've got to prove that you still have it. And, he's improved technically. That the one thing that I can give Weston is that he was always very poor in the build-out. Very poor. But he's improved that aspect of his game dramatically. That is, the build-out means receiving the ball, in the midfield third from the defensive third and progressing it. Now, usually the way he progresses it is with the ball at his feet. He dribbles. He's a guy who just likes to drive at you through midfield. But the aspect of his game that's really improved since being in Juve is, his distribution and his ability to participate in a group build-out under pressure. So it's good to see him improving. I still don't think he's improved enough to be a 9, but I will give him a solid 8.
Attacking midfielder. Hector Herrera versus Gio Reyna. Both of these guys playing at a very high level. Herrera moved from Porto a year and a half ago, and he hasn't always been starting, and he's had an up and down time, but you have to give the guy props. He's had some really good moments playing for them, and some not so great. Gio Reyna has 4 goals and 6 assists for Dortmund this season. He is absolutely a top 5 under 20 player in the world. That is not exaggerating. Herrera, we give a 7 out of 10. He would probably be an 8, but the last year and a half with Atletico Madrid, he hasn't always been top of his game. 7 out of 10 though, still a huge threat in Mexico's midfield. Now I struggled with this rating for Gio Reyna because I don't think he's a 9. He's not quite a top 25 attacking midfielder in the world yet, but he's not that far off. Currently Borussia Dortmund's best attacker with Haaland out. I'm giving him an 8.5.
All right, so I got that one wrong. I'll be happy to admit that. I don't think Gio Reyna is quite an 8.5. I got a little carried away. And I think Hector Herrera I probably should have given an 8.2 at that point. But what I find the most interesting is that I had Gio Reyna as a midfielder when he'd never played as a midfielder for Dortmund. But I remember at the time looking at his skill set and saying, oh, this guy's a central midfielder. He's a central attacking midfielder. And eventually Dortmund did move him. So that was good to see. Hopefully we'll start using him there as well, because I think that is his best position. Maybe he was going to get it in that first qualifying camp, but getting injured against El Salvador did not help his case, and he hasn't come back yet. Ultimately, I'm going to give a different I'm going to move Gio Reyna out to the right wing. This is where he plays for Gregg Berhalter. I'm going to bring in Yunus Musah. Now, Yunus Musah is the guy that we want basically running things in the midfield for us with Weston McKennie. So it is Yunus Musah against Hector Herrera. Hector Herrera, and I know people are going to look at these ratings of 7 and 7 and go, how on earth could you put them both in the same category? Well, I'll tell you how. Hector Herrera is not the same player he used to be. When people think of Hector Herrera, they have so many memories attached to him that they're like, what a great player. And he was a great player in his day. And he's still a good player, but he's nowhere near the same level. I mean, let me just tell you this. He started 2 games for Atletico Madrid this season. 2. Okay. He's played less than 300 minutes. He's played 3 full games. Okay. 270 something minutes total for Atletico in the first half of the season. They don't really rate him anymore. Okay. He's only 31. So again, you don't feel like he should be aging out this quickly. He's not the same guy. He's slow. He's slower to react. His passing and his ability to break down teams is not as sharp as it used to be. He still can get the occasional goal. And so I think he's competent, but he's not at 8. He's not a very good midfielder anymore. It's just not. I probably should have given him an 8 a year ago, even though he was already starting to decline, and I could see it, and Mexican fans were very mad at me for calling it out. But I could have been nicer. I could have given him an 8, and I definitely went too high with Gio. But Musah gets a 7. Well, the other thing is, look at Musah versus Herrera in this last, Mexico-USA game. Herrera was anonymous, completely anonymous, and Musah bossed that midfield. So the idea that there's a separation between these two right now, I'm just not buying it. In fact, Musah has more minutes in La Liga this year than Hector Herrera does. So I'm just going to give you that. Now let's jump into the really fun one.
Everybody's waiting for Chucky Lozano versus Christian Pulisic, 25-year-old playing for Napoli. I want to give Chucky Lozano props here because he was at PSV Eindhoven and crushing it, and he made that jump to Napoli, which was a very tough jump for him. It's a whole different level going from Holland to a top 5 league in the world, and he struggled the first year, but he didn't quit. He put his head down, and now this season he's really starting to show his quality. He has like 6 or 7 goals, 2 or 3 assists. Christian Pulisic, the only thing holding Christian Pulisic back from being a top 10 winger in the world right now is his injuries. So good 1v1, very hard to track, very hard to mark. Chucky Lozano gets an 8 out of 10. I don't think he's quite a top 25 winger in the world yet, but he's not that far off. Christian Pulisic is, for me, a top 10 left winger in the world. If he could stay healthy, he would be getting 20 goals and 10 assists every season. Not even kidding.
I don't have a problem with those ratings. I would still give those ratings. The only difference is Pulisic has been injured so much this last year that he hasn't had a chance to show what he can do. And so I'm happy to drop Pulisic down to an 8 for now, just because I think that part of being a good player is staying healthy. Right? It's one of the few things I agree with Alexi Lalas on, is that staying healthy is a skill. And I don't think it's a skill in the way that he means it, because it's not always under the player's control. But at the end of the day, your quality and your value is based on how, much you're able to stay healthy. And so I will drop him down to an 8, even though I think a healthy Pulisic is absolutely a 9, and a healthy Lozano is probably about an 8 as well. By the way, Lozano's been struggling with Napoli this year too. He hasn't been as effective as he was last time round. But he's still entering his prime, 26 years old. We'll see how he does. I think both of these guys are probably an 8, but the only thing that's making them equal with their ratings is Pulisic's injuries. I think a fully fit Pulisic, which, fingers crossed, now that he's back, he stays that way, is a 9 for sure. For sure. Definitely top 25 left winger in the world, probably pushing top 10. Okay.
And here we see a pretty big disparity. Jesus Tecatito Corona, another excellent midfielder, 27-year-old, currently playing for FC Porto, versus Jordan Morris. Now, I know some USMNT fans are going to come after me for this. They don't think Jordan Morris should start for us. But regardless, I think that Gregg Berhalter would start Jordan Morris tomorrow if we had a competitive game on that right wing. I know some other prospects like Uli Yanez or Timmy Weah or Conrad de la Fuente are there, but I just think that he probably trusts Morris more. Jesus Tecatito Corona, 8 out of 10. He's in his prime right now, and he's absolutely blowing it up, not only in the Portuguese league, but in the Champions League as well. I watched the Mexico versus Holland game recently, and he was torturing that Dutch defense. He is as good as Chucky Lozano. The only difference is he hasn't made that move to a top 5 league yet. Jordan Morris stayed in his comfort zone in Seattle, where he has been very good. But guys, there's levels to this. Being good in MLS is not the same thing as being good in the Champions League or even a top 5 league in Europe. and he's been inconsistent for the national team. Yes, he's good when we play lower levels of CONCACAF, but the minute you go up a level, like when we played Mexico in the Gold Cup last year, he was completely anonymous.
No Jordan Morris. Right after this, Jordan Morris got injured. It tore his ACL and has been out all year. So he's not there. So this is where we have Gio Reyna go up against Jesus. I'm giving Jesus Corona a 7 and Gio Reyna an 8. Now, Corona has regressed in the last year. This is what's so baffling to me. How many Mexican players have regressed in the last year? And it's surprising. It's not always to do with age because, like, he's 28. He's right in his prime. Why is he regressed? I do not know. Maybe there's a possibility that, for some of these guys, they feel a little too comfortable in their positions with the national team, and so they're not pushing themselves as much as they could be. But that doesn't really explain their club form. I think in Jesus Corona's, place, he wanted a move to Sevilla this last summer, and when he didn't get to it, when he didn't get the move that he wanted, he suffered mentally, like that happens. You drop your focus, you drop the levels of hunger, the desire, that drops just a little bit because you're not as focused every day on staying at the top level. You're not focused every day on improving, on staying sharp, on working on your weaknesses, on enhancing your strengths. If your mind has been turned and now you're looking at other clubs and wishing you were somebody else, it can absolutely affect your form. Maybe it's not permanent. Maybe he'll come back eventually. But for this last year, both for the national team and for Porto, I have to give him a 7. Remember, in the Champions League, he was the guy who lost the game for Porto by giving it away so needlessly inside his own half, and for the national team, he's been pretty awful as well. So down to 7, and Gio Reyna's an 8. Like I said before, 8.5 was probably a little too high for him, but he's still a very good midfielder. The fact that Dortmund literally put him in their central midfield, and before he got injured, he was killing it. He was absolutely killing it. Very, very good midfielder, and I think has a potential to be a 9 or even a 10 one day. I've said this before, and I stand by it. Gio Reyna will be a Ballon d'Or nominee one day.
Raul Jimenez versus Josh Sargent, 29-year-old. Raul Jimenez has without a doubt been the top forward in CONCACAF for the last few years. He is such a complete forward, guys. Very hard to find a weakness in Jimenez's game. Unfortunately, he did get this head injury recently. He fractured his skull, and we don't know if he's ever going to be playing again. And if he does, is he still going to be the same player he was before? He's going to be 30 in May, but I'm rooting for Jimenez. He is such a good player, guys, and Mexico doesn't really have a number 9 to replace him right now. So fingers crossed for them that he comes back and gets healthy soon. Josh Sargent over at Werder Bremen has been making strides of progress. He doesn't get a lot of service, but boy, he works his ass off, and he is very much the focal point of that attack. People who like to see goals go in the back of the net underrate Josh Sargent because their metric for player evaluation is very simple. But when Sargent gets to a club that gives him good service, he's going to show everybody what he's all about. I think he's our number 1 forward, and I think he would start tomorrow if we had a competitive game. 9 out of 10 for Raul Jimenez. He might not quite be top 10 in the world, but he's definitely a top 25 forward in the world. Josh Sargent, 7 out of 10 for him. He's been good, but not great. Part of that is where he's playing. Part of that is that he still has some weaknesses in his game that he needs to work on. So yeah, 7 out of 10 for Josh Sargent. Now, 82 for Mexico and 82.5. And here's the X factor.
Okay, so obviously Sargent isn't a starter for the U.S. anymore. He's not even in the rosters anymore. And it wasn't just that. I mean, look, he went to a club that also didn't give him service, Norwich. But it's not just that. His confidence is completely shot, and mentally, he doesn't seem to have the fortitude, at least right now, to make good performances, up the level of his game. I know the guy has talent. It's very obvious to me that he does. I don't think he has the mentality, at least not right now at this point in his life, to be a killer, right? To be a forward, you have to be a killer. You have to have some swag. You have to have some arrogance. You have some real hunger and desire. I just don't think Josh has that. And until he gets that, he probably won't be a serious national team contender. But he's not there. But Ricardo Pepi is. And Ricardo Pepi goes up against Raul Jimenez. These are the two, strikers for us for right now. Pepi's 18 years old. Raul Jimenez is 30. I do have to drop Raul because as much as I'm excited about Raul coming back and doing well, and he's had a few good games for Wolves, I haven't seen, the same guy that was playing before. He didn't have the same level of swag. He doesn't have the same that same killer instinct. I know he has some good games for Wolves, and I'm like, maybe it's going to come back next year. He's been very good, don't get me wrong. But, top 25 in the world right now, I don't think I can say that for him. We'll see how he does, and I'm rooting for the guy. It's a feel-good story, and you're just so happy for a guy like that to be able to come back, and the mentality that took for him to come back from that is amazing. Ricardo Pepi gets a 7. Good, competent striker. Still has weaknesses and still has a certain amount of inconsistency in his game. But I'm not going to give him a 6 because I don't think he's inconsistent across the board. I think he's had 2 inconsistent games for the U.S. while being really good all year long. So I am going to give him a 7. Hopefully he gets a good move to somewhere good in Europe. And by somewhere good, I mean a club that's going to give him opportunities and service. 2 things that matter and are going to continue to develop him as a player. I'm rooting for Ajax or Salzburg. I don't think he's going to go to Salzburg. They can't afford him. Maybe Ajax is a possibility. I hope Dallas doesn't price him out of a move.
Factor that really matters. Tata Martino versus Gregg Berhalter. And to be fair, this metric is going to matter even more than the player metrics because each of these guys has a massive impact on their entire team. Tata Martino has been a success wherever he went. Gregg Berhalter was somewhat successful with Columbus Crew, but has some major flaws, in my opinion, as a coach. Tata Martino gets 9 out of 10. Gregg Berhalter gets a 6, simply because he's been inconsistent. In 2019, I would have given him a 2 or a 3. He got his tactics wrong, he got his player selections wrong, and his in-game management was terrible. Now this year, we've had a couple of friendlies where he's changed his tactics and he does seem to be improving in that regard, and his player selection has improved a lot. Unfortunately, I still haven't seen anything from his in-game management that gives me a lot of confidence in Gregg Berhalter, so I'll be keeping my fingers crossed for him in 2021 when we actually play competitive games. Now, Tata Martino brings the score up to 91 for Mexico and 88.5 for the US.
Okay, so before we get further, I have to rate both of these guys. Now, I'm going to give Tata Martino. Now, listen, Tata Martino is getting a lot of slack in the Mexican press and with the fan base. Naturally, right? He hasn't delivered the way that they hoped he would so far. I think that Tata's record speaks for itself, okay? This guy coached Barcelona, and I know he was only there for a year, but I think he did a pretty good job, finished second in the league, just behind Atletico by like 1 point or something like that, very close. Won the Copa del Rey, coached Argentina to 2 Copa America finals where they lost on penalties. That's basically a crapshoot. If we're talking about a guy with 2 Copa Americas to his name, if they win those. Took Paraguay to the quarterfinals of the 2010 World Cup where they lost 1-0 to eventual champions Spain, and that was one of the best Spain teams of all time, or at least in recent memory. So he did a very good job with Paraguay. And then to go to Atlanta and win a trophy, the league trophy, MLS Cup, in only the second year of their existence is almost unheard of in this modern era of MLS. So his record speaks for itself. Now, he hasn't been perfect, right? Some of his player selection has been a little shocking, particularly when it comes to the fullbacks and maybe even the center backs at some point. But mainly, I think that's the issue with him is, Jorge Sanchez should probably be getting that fullback spot now, and Gerardo Arteaga, the left back, should be replacing Jesus Gallardo. But I think his record speaks for itself, and Tata is a victim of Mexico having an aging team that is no longer developing the kind of players they used to develop. And so he's stuck with, facing the United States that is a completely different team now and have tons of players playing at very high levels. Berhalter gets a 6, and that might be, I'm going to keep him right where he was. Now, it's weird to say that because he beat Tata 3 times. But the problem with Gregg is that he's still very inconsistent. And a lot of his lineups and his choices in this World Cup qualifying campaign have hurt us. Most notably the Panama game. But even when we played Canada, he's still very inconsistent. Hopefully that's starting to change now, and I want very much to give him a 7, maybe a year from now, or an 8 even, hopefully, because we're going to be going to Qatar. But he's still been inconsistent for me this whole last year. His player selection, not just in World Cup qualifying, but even in Gold Cup and Nations League. I mean, never forget, this guy started Jackson Ewell and Sebastian Lletget in that Nations League semifinal in midfield, and then wondered why we struggled to create. And the 2 times that he beat Mexico in the summer, I think it was pretty even with the Gold Cup. But with the Nations League, he actually set us up to fail. He left Sergino, Dest, and Tim Ream on that left-hand side, and they just couldn't exploit it. I mean, Mexico was attacking that area so much that night, and they just couldn't really exploit it until Diego Lainez finally came on and gave them something there. So we did manage to get the win. I'm going to say the Nations League was a lot more despite Gregg Berhalter, not because of him. The Gold Cup was pretty close. We had some chances. Mexico had some chances. We both fluffed them. 1-0 in extra time was probably a fair result. But his big win was in qualifying, of course, the 2-0 at home in Cincinnati, because not only did he get the lineup right, he got the tactics right and the game management right. I just wish we saw that from Gregg Berhalter on a more consistent basis. Then I'll be happy to ratchet him up a few points.
I don't want to get too much into the future, but the reality is if you look at these starting lineups, Mexico's average age is 29 and the US's is 22. Right now, I think Mexico just has the edge. Part of that depends on whether or not Raul Jimenez can ever make a comeback. I think a year or two from now, it's going to be a very different story. A lot of Mexico's guys are aging. Herrera, Gallardo, Moreno, the goalkeeper Ochoa. I'm going to do another video at some point in the future talking about the future of Mexico's national team versus the future of the U.S. men's national team. And it is not quite as tight or as close as this one. The U.S. is producing players at a level that Mexico just isn't right now. That's it for now, guys. Thanks for watching.
So yeah, that's the video, guys. I think it's very obvious that the U.S. is ahead of Mexico at this point, both from a player profile perspective and also from results. I mean, we beat them 3 times this year. We are better than them. And Mexico fans, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but if you're going to get mad at me, you're getting mad at the wrong person, because reality is your youth development is suffering, and you need to start looking at Liga MX and the Mexican Federation and figure out what's going on. Otherwise, up until 2022, you're probably okay. You'll probably qualify for Qatar. I don't think Mexico is going to do very well in Qatar just because they're going to be another year older, and that is going to hurt them. But after that, I do think they have real problems as the rest of this generation fades out. A lot of the guys that they think are young and that they point to as young players are not young. They're in their mid-20s, okay? Luis Romo, Charlie Rodriguez, Sebastian Cordova, even Alexis Vega, JJ Macias. These guys are not that young anymore, and a lot of them have stagnated, and they're not really making progress anymore. So that's the video, guys. Hope that was interesting and enjoyable to you. Let me know if you like this. I might do one of these for Canada as well before our big showdown, the USA versus Canada lineups in Canada this coming January or February. So let me know if that's something that you guys want. I would definitely do it. Thanks for watching. You guys have a good one.